consequences fix behavior, your classroom would already be calm. Most classrooms already have tons of consequences. Office referrals, clip systems, level systems, sent to the principal's office, ridicule. All of those are happening, but guess what? The behaviors also keep happening. So what do you do at that point? You ask yourself the question, do consequences even matter? But that's not the right question. The question should be, why aren't they working? So if a child doesn't have the skill already, the consequence is not automatically and magically going to teach them how to do it. So there may be a skill deficit or a performance deficit. Not all misbehavior is defiance. Sometimes children just don't have the skills necessary. In a skill deficit, the child doesn't have the skill at all and they need to be taught. In a performance deficit, the child has the skill, but they are not performing it accurately enough. So it needs a little bit of something else. So, for example, a child may not know how to wait until their turn. They might not have that emotional regulation or that delayed reinforcement. A child may have never raised their hand and had to wait to be called on. Maybe they just transferred in from a different school, so you have to teach that skill. Or maybe that child does not know how to appropriately access attention from their peers. Maybe they have to act out, or maybe they throw stuff instead of just saying, hey, how you doing? Can we talk? My name is so-and-so. What's your name? Just basic skills. So there are skill deficits and there's performance deficits. If you're just using consequences, you're just reacting to the behavior as it is. But if it's a skill deficit, then that's something you can actually teach, and that's where you'll see the difference. Some students even suffer from what we call an emotional regulation lag, which means that their emotional regulation lags behind its expected development, much slower than their peers. So in that situation, it doesn't really matter what consequences you serve them. When they're overwhelmed and they feel things faster, stronger, and longer, they're not asking or thinking, what's the consequence I'm getting? Am I getting what I want? They're just trying to survive the moment. They're just reacting to what's going on. And it might take them a while to be able to come down before they can even access the skills that we want them to do. So when they're just in fight or flight response, they cannot access the behavior that we're expecting at that time. So like we talked about before, there's a performance deficit and there's a skill deficit. So in a performance deficit, they already have the skill. But in a skill deficit, they don't have the skill at all. So it doesn't matter how many consequences you give them, they're not going to be able to do what you asked of them. So we have to keep those things in mind when we're addressing problem behavior in the classroom, because that will help us to correct the behavior and to teach the skills that are necessary. So now we get to the point of, what do we do? So what's missing? Now that we know, we have to identify whether it's a performance deficit or a skill deficit. We can approach it in one of two ways. If it's a skill deficit, we have to teach the replacement behavior. So if a child does not have the skill, we teach them a skill that can meet the same function as the problematic behavior. Let's say the problematic behavior is calling out in class. Usually that results in some type of attention, but maybe they don't have the skill. So we teach them, hey, if you need something, if you have to use the restroom, just raise your hand. I'll make sure to call on you. If I don't call on you right away, I'll at least look at you, acknowledge you, and then I'll call on you and you can let me know what you need. So that's if they don't have it at all. They have a skill deficit. If it's a performance deficit, you have to catch them being good. Basically, catch them doing what they already can do and what you want to see, and reinforce that immediately. So let's take that same scenario where the child did not know how to raise their hand. But in this case, the child does know how to raise their hand. You've seen them do it before, but they're not doing it often enough. They're still blurting out in class. So in this situation, you just wait. And you wait for the perfect opportunity. You see them raising their hand and you catch them being good immediately. You raised your hand, you waited, thank you. What do you need? And then they'll go ahead and tell you. And you want to do that often, okay? Frequently, early, and often. Because once again, those children are just not being reinforced enough for doing the proper behavior. And if they can get that attention, the same attention that they get for blurting out by raising their hand, then we're going to see raising hand more often. Next is tone control. In some situations, the tone you use is much more effective than the words you're actually using. So you have to be very, very conscious of the tone you're approaching the student with, especially for those that have that late emotional regulation, because anything can set them off. And you might say, well, they need to have thicker skin. They need to act their age. And if that was the case, the entire class would be fine and you would never have a problem. But this is the reality of what we're dealing with. Different age children, different emotional regulation skills, and as a result, some children need to be taught while others can do it as soon as they get there. So in this situation, you need to make sure you control your tone, because that way you can be the most effective with the most students. Stay calm, stay collected, and deliver your message. And one of the last strategies you can use is the proximal control strategy. And that basically means you want to have a close proximity to the student, and a lot of times the behavior will decrease without you having to say a single word. Just you being close, just your presence, just your aura will shut down the problematic behavior. But it also works as reinforcement, because if the child is doing it for attention and you stand closer, you're reinforcing the problem behavior. But that reinforcement can also cause that behavior to stop, at least in the moment. Now, if that is not being effective, there's also other strategies we can use, but that will knock out at least 80% of the problem behaviors, especially if it's low level, like talking out of turn or making silly noises or faces. Not every behavior needs an audience, so the more private your correction, the less powerful that behavior becomes. So if you can do that regularly, you're well on your way to using less energy to control your classroom. So if this has been effective, if you found this information helpful, make sure you stay tuned to this series, because we have another video to go. Make sure you start with the first video and make sure you stay tuned to the last. And you can do that by making sure you hit that subscribe button, that notification bell, and if this was a good one, make sure you hit that like button. We'll continue to put out information like this, and make sure you stay ready and make sure you stay tuned.